Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you. Of course, you can stream on am950radio.com, but please meet my morning stars. Hey, Robert, shalom to you. Meet them at the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, everybody. Please, as you come on, put those thumbs up, help us with the algorithms, and then go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page. I'm also sharing it on my X feed, which is at Santita J. And so we have a lot to talk about. Of course, I have it on Reverend Jesse Jackson's page, and I want you to share it on yours. Let's talk. We've got a lot to talk about today. Next hour, we will be talking about Vice President Kamala Harris and identity. Many people are wondering about these numbers, her poll numbers, which are not as strong as those of Hillary Rodham Clinton's and that of President Biden's at the same point in their campaigns with the Black and brown communities. What's going on? And then there are questions about how she self-identifies, how she's perceived. Is she Indian? Is she Black? Can she be both? You know, in America, the color line, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois said that this was the issue of the 20th century. And it seems that we are bringing it into the 21st century as multiracial as all Americans are. As my father often says, Black people in America, particularly those of us who are foundational, we are products of white forefathers and Black foremothers. Sometimes it was consensual. Sometimes it was not. It is what it is. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Hey, Bernadette. Hey, everybody. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Everybody, please like, thumbs up. But in this first hour, we're going to talk about this case that has just broken everybody's heart. Those of us who have hearts, those of us who have consciences. Something happened, and it has just been absolutely stunning to watch someone be executed when there has been no DNA evidence to link him to the crime, as people begged to save this man's life. Marcellus Williams. What happened? Why was he executed? There was no evidence linking him to the crime. He proclaimed his innocence, and it seems that he was. And yet, despite the protestations of the prosecutor, the governor said no. He should be executed, and he was executed last night, early this morning. It is just heartbreaking. And there are several more, at least 9 others who are on the docket to be executed this year. They're calling it a GOP killing spree. Well, we've got, of course, attorney Mark Fancher with us, brilliant author and lawyer, brilliant civil libertarian, but someone who, when we came up on YouTube and Facebook, when Mark turned and saw who was sitting in with us, he said, wow. And this is someone who will make you say, wow. I'm going to have to hold back the tears because I've admired him for so many years. Many of us saw him, of course, in the O.J. Simpson trial. But his passion in life, and of course, he gained worldwide fame, being part of that dream team. It's been in protecting the innocent, the least of these, people who have no voice, people who have no money. He co-founded the Innocence Project because he said, no. There are some people who are the damned, the dispossessed, as my father referred to them in his 1984 presidential speech at the Democratic Convention. The people who are locked out, the boats who are stuck at the bottom. And I have a soft spot in my heart for anyone who goes and takes that last lamb, that last sheep, Mark Fancher, and bring them into the fold. And this is what Barry Scheck does. And we are so honored to have you with us today. So honored. And thank you just for all of the work that you have done down through the years. We just thank you. We are forever in your debt. A brilliant freedom fighter. And so my father said, from one freedom fighter to another, at least that's what he wants to be. He sends his love to you today. And we share our love with you right now.
Right back to him. He's been an inspiration for all of us.
You're an inspiration. You are. And as Mark said, wow. So tell us about Marcellus Williams, this case. The prosecutor, Wesley Bell, who might be going to Congress if the poll numbers bear out, in a very controversial race, but he's the first Black prosecutor in that space in St. Louis. He said, no, don't kill him. Don't execute him. The evidence just isn't there. And yet the governor proceeded. Can you take us back and tell us what happened in this case? It turns out it was a reporter from the St. Louis Dispatch who was found
Yeah.
stabbed to death in her home. What happened?
Well, the reporter, Felicia Gale, a wonderful reporter, uh, was found murdered in her home with a knife that came from the kitchen. And she was stabbed, I think, close to over 40 times. And what was so interesting about this case is that there was another murder um, that was similar, uh, where there was a break-in and the victim was stabbed with a knife from the kitchen, uh, upwards of 40 times. And the medical examiner in this jurisdiction had identified those two crimes as having the same modus operandi, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because that is typical of a rage crime when somebody stabs that many times. So Marcellus himself was basically put into this case by a jailhouse informant, a guy named Henry Cole, who had a record for um not necessarily telling the truth as a jailhouse informant, and also uh, a former girlfriend of his named Asaro, who herself, for all we know, might have been involved in this crime because she certainly, while Marcellus was in jail on another crime, she, had access to his car and, in and out of his car, and some proceeds from the crime were found in that car, right? So that part was pretty suspicious. When I say proceeds, I mean a calendar and a ruler. Uh, but basically, the case against Marcellus was based on incentivized testimony because they got rewards, both Asaro and Henry Cole. And there was no physical evidence that really connected him to the crime. There was a shoe print in blood in the crime scene that didn't match him. And for a long time, uh, they took fingerprints, but they never compared it to him. Uh, so, which of course makes no sense, I realize, but they destroyed that print. We'd love to see it. That was another issue. But what really happened after he was convicted and sentenced to death is that the innocence organizations, the Midwest Innocence Project and our project, began to get involved in the case. And we made an application to have a DNA test done, which was eventually done on the actual murder weapon itself. And the results were that Marcellus was excluded as having left any DNA on that murder weapon, which of course had been used, repeatedly to stab Miss Gale in this case. And we went, there was a lot of publicity associated with that. And we were all saying you can't execute somebody when the DNA on the murder weapon excludes them. And Governor Eric Greitens actually listened and stayed the execution and appointed what they call a court of inquiry. Now, there's a very interesting and we think excellent provision of the law in Missouri that came about from Governor Carnahan because he faced some cases where he believed people were innocent. One very famous one where there was an exoneration. And so he instituted a statute getting passed that allowed the governor to appoint a board of inquiry, which is a board of judges, to look at a capital case and review whether or not the governor should exercise executive clemency. And that statute actually says that once such a board of inquiry is created, it it shall give a report to the governor. All right, so that's very strong language. So what happened in this case is that Governor Greitens put together a board of inquiry, but then he left office, as you may recall, because he got involved in a scandal. So he left office, but the board of inquiry continued, right? Then Parsons, of course, became the governor eventually after that. But we made presentations of the DNA evidence and other evidence to that board of inquiry. And this is one of the issues that arose, actually, that we just took to the Supreme Court. But obviously, Marcellus was executed, and we didn't get any relief from the Supreme Court, although we did get 3 votes for a stay from Judge Jackson, Judge Kagan, and Judge Sotomayor. But one of the issues there had to do actually with the abolition of this court of inquiry, because Governor Parsons just got rid of it. And that is a bit odd, because on other occasions when a board of inquiry was created, they just continued, even if they didn't issue a report to the governor, and nobody was ever executed when a board of inquiry was created and just had it abolished. So that was one of the things that we were troubled by, because we don't know if they ever made a recommendation to the governor. He's not saying, or if they were not unanimous in their recommendation, one way or the other, or what it was. But we know that they were functioning. We know we made presentations in front of them. We know they were reviewing the evidence, and they were all respected judges in Missouri that were sitting on this court. But what eventually happened is that there has been a big controversy in Missouri and in other states with the creation of what you might call progressive prosecutors, right? Mm-hmm. And so Prosecutor Gardner in St. Louis, and of course Wes Bell fell into that category, but Wes Bell is in St. Louis County, I think. Mm-hmm. But there was Wes Bell. A very long story short, there were a number of controversial cases where people were exonerated, right? Midwest Innocence Project was part of most of them. What would happen is that the local prosecutor would go into court. This happened in Kansas too. And they would say, I think our client, the client is innocent. And the Attorney General's office in both Kansas and Missouri tried to intervene, right? And say, no, we want to be part of this procedure, even if the local prosecutor found exculpatory evidence, or came, as happened in this case, came to believe that the conviction was merited, and certainly the death penalty wasn't merited. There's now a statute where that local prosecutor can make a motion to vacate the conviction on the grounds of innocence or of some unconstitutional practices that went on in the case. And a judge is appointed to hear that. And if that judge, under this provision, agrees with the local prosecutor, and the state attorney general can participate and ask questions, but cannot appeal that decision. So that is the procedure that we had going on in the Marcellus Williams case, that Wes Bell, and he cannot get enough credit for this as far as I'm concerned. He went out, he appointed a special prosecutor, a man named Matthew Jacober, who was part of a big firm, and of course had prosecutorial background, an excellent, outstanding lawyer, and a person from Wes Bell's Conviction Integrity Unit, worked together on this case, right? Now, of course, the innocence organizations participated just representing Marcellus, but West Bell came to the conclusion that this execution shouldn't go forward. And so the stage was set for us to have this hearing, which we began to have in front of a judge. And we still had the DNA, which excluded Marcellus, and other evidence. One of the issues that, of course, we had been raising all along is that there was what they call a Batson violation. In other words, the prosecutor who picked the jury in Marcellus's case, we thought plainly had exercised his peremptory challenges, 86% of them against black jurors. And one juror in particular that was struck was somebody that in the course of, this was not, the way the Batson challenge works, the judge will ask the prosecutor, what were your reasons? Because he struck, I think it was I think he had 9 strikes of jurors. And 7 of them were black people, and it was 86% of his strikes were directed at African Americans, which in and of itself is pretty suspect. Mm-hmm. But when the judge was asking him questions, he gave his reasons, which were supposed to be race neutral, okay? And that was the record that went up on appeal. But what happened after this is that in our hearing, right, that happened, I guess over the last 3 weeks, the district attorney's office, West Bell, and Matthew Jacober, the special counsel that was appointed, first of all, they went to look for the trial prosecutor's notes on jury selection, which he admitted he did keep such notes, but they were not in the prosecutor's file, so we couldn't see the notes. And that's disturbing. They might have been destroyed for all we know, but it's disappointing that those notes were not there because it was heavily contested issue on direct appeal for Marcellus. But more to the point, the prosecutor testified in this hearing that was held. We got 6 hours altogether to make an evidentiary presentation. So that was 2 hours for the AG, 2 hours for West Bell's office, 2 hours for the innocence organizations representing Marcellus. And so in the presentations, the trial prosecutor actually testified. And when he testified, he admitted that there was this one juror that he struck in part because he was African, the juror was African American, and he looked as though he could be Marcellus's brother, and they both wore glasses. That was his supposed race-neutral reason. That's not a very good race-neutral reason. That's a Batson violation in of itself. And so that's the issue that was part of our claim to the United States Supreme Court. The judge who heard this was saying, well, I'm not sure that this is so different than what was put forward on appeal, and I don't really think I have the discretion to disagree with the Missouri Supreme Court on this point, so he left it. What happened during the course of our hearing, however, is that we had this solid DNA exclusion of Marcellus, but the prosecutor, the trial prosecutor, and the chief detective kept on saying, well, we were touching the knife. Now, this is unheard of because this is just a few years after the O.J. Simpson case. But more to the point, it is just a few years after a commission that Janet Reno appointed, and I was a member of this commission, on the future of DNA evidence, issued a report on how evidence should be collected and preserved from a crime scene so that you could get accurate DNA testing. And, we went on at that because obviously that was a big problem in the O.J. Simpson case. They cross-contaminated samples. They put, wet samples into plastic bags, which created bacterial contamination. We had a whole pamphlet that came out of the National Institute of Justice saying what every law enforcement officer ought to know about DNA. And one of them is always wear gloves, right? When each item of evidence. And The
Wait,
lawyers,
they did not know that?
well, they claimed they did not, they admitted that they knew that the knife would be potentially subjected to DNA testing, right? Before and after the trial, right? They knew that, but they felt that since the knife had been examined for purposes of taking fingerprints and they couldn't find anything there, um, and they had a theory that the perpetrator wore gloves because one of the two jailhouse snitches said that Marcellus had admitted wearing gloves and the other one had, you know, said, no, he didn't say that he wore gloves, right? So it was it was their theory, right? That the
That's high
perpetrator
school chemistry. You contaminate a beaker.
exactly.
Just
So
don't
it was
understand.
terrible. So we had DNA results from the knife that excluded Marcellus. They came back in during this hearing and said, no, no, no. What actually happened is that the lead detective and the prosecutor were touching that knife both before the trial and during the trial without any gloves on. And nobody remembered that. The defense lawyers, who are now judges, didn't remember that. But that's what they said. So it, because West Bell is a office is honorable, um, we went out and had additional DNA testing done to compare the DNA from the prosecutor and the lead detective to the DNA profile that we found on the knife. And it was consistent with them. So it may very well have been that they did touch it as they claimed, and that in turn, destroyed, or certainly made it very difficult to get all the DNA evidence that you might want from that knife. And of course, Marcellus had already been excluded from it. So we actually, one of the issues that we raised is that they literally, by grabbing that knife with their bare hands, they were in effect destroying biological evidence, because everybody knew by that point that you simply don't touch the murder weapon without gloves. So that was one of the issues that went before the judge. And, what actually happened at our hearing is that once it came out that their DNA was on the knife, West Bell's office, with the approval of the judge, we entered into an agreement for what is known as an Alford plea. An Alford plea is, Mark will tell you, is a plea where the defendant says, I'm innocent, but the state does have evidence that, if put on, might lead to my conviction, right? But I'm maintaining my innocence. So Marcellus maintained his innocence, agreed to a sentence of life without parole. And we're talking about a man that was a poet, that was an imam in the penal institution. I mean, he was the spiritual leader of the Muslim community in the place
Marcellus
where
was.
Marcellus was. He's quite an extraordinary guy. And so, that was the plea arrangement that we had, right? And that's how this hearing was going to end. And in theory, ordinarily, if the conclusion of the judge shouldn't be appealed, couldn't be appealed to the Missouri Supreme Court. Nonetheless, the Attorney General's office was able to get it to the Missouri Supreme Court. It reached out to look at it, and they said, look, you have to hold another hearing and state your reasons, and we're not going to allow this life without parole plea to go forward. Now, by the way, it was very clear that the husband of Felicia Gale, Dr. Pikus, told the judge, and has maintained for years, that he was against Marcellus being executed. So, and there's a crime victim bill of rights that's in the Missouri Constitution. So, that's not a lot of deference to the wishes of a crime victim in a capital case.
So let me just ask you this.
Yeah.
Was her husband a physician? Or
yes, he is a medical doctor, yes.
So what was it about the case that compelled him to say, "Do not execute this man"?
Well, I think his wife was against the death penalty, and I think Dr. Pikus was against the death penalty as
Mhm.
a principled matter. Uh, it was not a judgment on, um, Marcellus's guilt or innocence.
Innocent or guilty? Okay.
Yes, but that is the position they took, and that's the kind of thing that you would think the prosecutors, uh, certainly Wes Bell respected the wishes of the victim in that regard. Um, but the attorney general and certainly the governor did not. And I have to tell you that uh, I don't know of a case where the prosecutor's office has come forward and said, we do not believe that initially that this conviction um, and this death sentence should go forward because we have doubts about the reliability of the evidence. I mean, the plea bargain that was entered into, Marcellus is insisting he's innocent. He will plead to life without parole, but it leaves him still free to try to gather additional evidence to prove that he's innocent, right? And certainly it saves his life, uh, for the benefit of his family and all the people that love him, and the people to whom he is a religious leader. So this was extremely troubling in all ways, and it's just hard to take. Um, and the worst part of it is that we have some other innocence organizations. We're not supposed to uh, have clients executed. I mean, we've had a number that have been saved from the death penalty, certainly at the last minute. Excuse me, and proven
Mhm.
innocent. But it's it's not. It shouldn't happen in our line of work, to be honest with you. And we have another case coming up that is just as troubling as this one, that involves unreliable diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome. And it's Ro- Robert Roberson in Palestine, Texas, is on death row, and he has an execution date in October. But
Okay.
there's a very, very powerful new evidence of innocence that we hope will be recognized by the prosecutor there, or the governor or somebody, because uh, that is a very, very compelling case, just like this one.
Attorney Scheck, I'm trying to find out, and Mark, please feel free to jump in because I'm the layperson here. How the attorney general and the prosecutor were at odds. I don't understand. I don't understand how there's no DNA evidence linking this man to this case, and the attorney general and the governor and the court just go ahead with the execution. I'm having a hard time with that.
Well, I think that this case is frustrating for that reason. Uh, Over the years, many death penalty opponents have made reference to what they call the evolving standards of decency, where as a society, as people, we continue to grow, we become more mature, we have a more humane viewpoint on these kinds of things, whether it's even appropriate to put a person to death. And in this case, you have a victim's family that has evolved. They're the products of an evolving standard of decency. They recognize that the death penalty is inappropriate. You have a progressive prosecutor who also it recognizes that it's not appropriate in this case. You have people all over the country who are heartsick about what happened here. And so it leaves a certain number of people out who are still stuck in a place that is barbaric, that is irrational, that is against the best interests of humanity. And when we look at these individuals, the ones who are stuck there, then we have to reflect on the fact that when they've done studies on the likelihood of the death penalty being used, they found that the determining factor is the race of the victim. So if you got a white victim, then it's more likely that the death penalty is going to be imposed, which highlights and really affirms the slogan Black Lives Matter, because that's a reflection of the value that's been placed by our society on lives based on race. And if it's not a white life, then it doesn't really matter. And so when you're dealing with people who are political animals, people who have descended into the depths of depravity by becoming politicians, personal viewpoint there, then what they do is they make calculated decisions based not so much on what the moral thing to do is, what the legal thing to do is, what the right thing to do is, but what makes the most sense for them as politicians. And if they're looking ahead to what the sound bites are going to be, what the campaign ads are going to be in the future, they want to make sure that there is no soundbite, that there is no political ad that holds them up as being soft on crime. And so when they've got a person who's been accused and who is standing with the threat of the death penalty hanging over his head, if it's not a white person, then he's that other. And so he's disposable. And he is subject to political use and exploitation. And so, without any regard at all for all of the things that most normal people are concerned about, without regard to the law, without regard to what basic human decency and morality would require, they make this decision that they're going to go ahead for purposes of political advantage and let this man die. And it is beyond unconscionable. It is beyond criminal. It's really hard to even wrap your head around when you think about what kind of a person would stand by and allow this type of thing to happen.
I think that's exactly right. And what makes it so troubling is in this particular case, the Batson challenge was a very, very powerful one. I mean, it's clear that the prosecutor's office was using these strikes in a racially discriminatory way. I mean, the record there is extremely powerful. And that is one of the reasons why what Mark says happens all the time in that county. Let's remember, this is where Robert McCulloch was the district attorney at the time of the Michael Brown case, right? And West Bell replaced him. There is a legacy of race discrimination in jury selection, certainly, and in the decision to charge somebody with a capital crime, with the death, ask for the death penalty. And lots of studies already in this county, right, that show that. And that's another reason this case is so troubling. But what Mark says is exactly right. We've known since this United States Supreme Court case, McCleskey, right? It's always been known that the race of the victim has everything to do with about who gets charged or not. And the most dangerous place to be is a black defendant charged with, the murder of a white person. Statistically, the odds are against you. And what Mark says about the politics of it, probably what creates those odds.
We're talking with attorney Barry Shack, co-founder of the Innocence Project. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it should be, because of course you remember him. So many of us remember you from the O.J. Simpson case, but that is a portion of your legacy. It's a tremendous portion of it. But going after saving those who are wrongfully convicted, saving those who are innocent, who are on death row. That really has been the thrust of your work, as far as I can see, just down through the years. And I want to know, what do you think is happening in the culture now? Because they say, I was reading a Slate magazine article that said that we are on a GOP killing spree, that at the end of this week, by Thursday, there will be, we're on track to have 5 executions. I mean, what is going on? I mean, with you got these progressive prosecutors who are under fire. I mean, Kim Fox in Illinois, we lost her, and I can't blame her. You look at what happened to Marilyn Mosby, who of course has been convicted on, a lot of people are very suspicious of what happened to her. But what happened in San Francisco? I mean, they are coming after these persons who don't want to put you to death, who don't want to put you in jail for life, who don't want to scar you. And now we've got, it appears that the evidence doesn't matter, Barry Shack.
Well,
you can just
I
be
think
executed.
Santita, you put your finger on it, because we have a movement of prosecutors that are setting up things like, happened here in this case, what we call conviction integrity units. The Innocence movement, we date the Innocence Project, was formed in 1992. Okay. And we now have 71 innocence organizations within the United States and 13 abroad. So it's become a kind of international civil rights movement. And, I couldn't, forgive me for diverting to this, but when I was 19 years old, I went to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, right? And I actually had worked for originally Eugene McCarthy, and then I began campaigning as a 19-year-old for Robert Kennedy. And then Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and a group of us went to the Democratic Convention with no place to go, and we wanted George McGovern to be the candidate for the Kennedy people. And I went there with a lawyer, somebody that, was at Yale Law School. I was a Yale undergraduate, just our first college graduate in my family. And I went with this fellow, Lanny Davis, who became a lawyer for the Clintons. And, yes.
Very dear friend.
Figure, Michael Cohen most recently. And Allard Lowenstein, who himself was eventually assassinated. And was a great civil rights worker during,
he was very close. He was a very close associate with Dr. King. My father.
Yes, he was.
Yes.
And so
Allard Lowenstein.
And so what happened? So I swear to you, this. I double checked with Lanny Davis because.
No, would you like to get something to drink?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I hadn't been back to the Democratic National Convention until this year in Chicago, right? So, and I said, Lanny, why don't you come with me? And he couldn't he had an operation, so for medical reasons he couldn't go back. But I went, right? Now this is what we saw, and I double checked with him because he's writing a memoir, and he asked me about it, and I was thinking of writing a memoir, and I wanted to make sure that with him that we had exactly the same recollection. So we're at the Palmer House in Chicago. And this is not long after Dr. King is assassinated, right? And there's this black man that gets up in a dashiki, and he starts giving this absolutely stunning, spellbinding speech that mesmerized everyone. And we were all saying, who is that guy? Who is that guy? It was Jesse Jackson. And he had just come from not too long earlier, the assassination of Dr. King. And so, it was stunning. Um, and,
Oh boy.
then of course, Lanny and Al went into the convention, although I don't think they were getting on the convention floor too often. And I went out into the street and I got gassed and I went home.
Oh my God.
But I took this trip back to Chicago this time. It was much different and better. But it brought to mind the fact, you ask, why is this going on now?
Yeah.
So much of what happened to form the innocence movement really started when we were holding these conferences about the death penalty in Chicago. All our friends at Northwestern Law School, Rob Warden and Larry Marshall and a whole group of people, we were working on cases where we were exonerating innocent people in Illinois. And the Governor Ryan, finally came forward and declared a moratorium on the death penalty. And, there was what they called a Ryan report. There were a whole group of reforms on that, eyewitness identification and false confessions and forensic science, all of which came out of that. So that was a really important moment for us in terms of the birth of the innocence movement.
But you know what? I will say this: when Governor Ryan, and I lived in New York at the time, because this was if this was worldwide news for this Illinois governor to halt
Yes.
executions. Attorney Mark Fanchen, from Rainbow Push, Attorney Jeanette Wilson just came in. She's Reverend Jackson's special assistant, but people heard that you were going to be here, so I'm suddenly very popular. Thank you very much, Attorney Shep.
That's why
we all felt that he would pay a heavy political price. Everybody said once he does this, they're going to send him to jail.
No,
Governor Ryan,
really.
Attorney Wilson. We felt that he was, and I'm wondering, how is it that I'm trying to figure out, because there's a movement. I mean, that has gone beyond America's borders. Because I've tracked the growth of the Innocence Project.
Yes, and it's international. And let me say this to get back to the original point that you were making and Mark was making, and that has to do with progressive prosecutors. It's not just Kim Foxx, who's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just Wesley Bell, who certainly deserves a lot of credit for what he did in trying to save Marcellus here. That was really terrific. And there was, Kim Gardner in St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
who is, but look at Florida. Andrew Warren is a white prosecutor, and he did a number of exonerations. He was a former United States attorney, assistant United States attorney. He was just a guy that was doing the right thing when it came to innocence cases. He didn't look like somebody that you could say, oh, he's following some kind of crazy left-wing agenda. Then there is also Monique Worrell,
Yes.
who was a terrific prosecutor. And I'm so happy that she's going to run again. And I hope Andrew runs again, because it was DeSantis using the legislature to get rid of them. It was outrageous, and it never should have happened. And right now in the state of Tennessee, there's a prosecutor, Steve Mulroy, who got elected in Memphis, who's done terrific work. And you saw what happened when those police officers, engaged in behavior which got them indicted, right? And Steve Mulroy was the prosecutor that, helped make that happen. Obviously, they have not been convicted of anything yet, but, that case we all saw was yet another one of these awful cases, dealing with improper police procedures, and just a group of officers that there's one of the great reforms in policing is it should be grounds for actually losing your job if you do not intervene when one of your fellow officers is engaging in uh, improper, unconstitutional, violent conduct, right? Um, and there's a lot of training on that, and of course we saw what happened in the George Floyd case. So uh, there is a there it what you are detecting is exactly true. um, there is a movement against progressive prosecutors, and it is politically motivated. And what's troubling about it is that so many of these prosecutors, they're not left-wing communist crazies. They're just interested in justice and getting it right. Um, but it is happening everywhere. I mean, one of the lawyers that I work with for over 20 years, who is a brilliant lawyer, Nina Morrison, uh, was, I think, our first innocence lawyer who became a federal judge. And when her confirmation hearings happened, you would see Ted Cruz and a number of Republican senators who they were attacking her. They were saying, "You're the reason that the homicide rate is up in Philadelphia," which I don't even think was true, but because a number of Nina's cases had been exonerations that occurred in Philadelphia, and some of them with Larry Krasner, who was the progressive DA who was elected there. So it is a concentrated political movement to go after progressive prosecutors. They were going after Alvin Bragg long before Trump was indicted, right? So that is a real problem in this country. And because so much of what the so-called progressive prosecutors have brought to the fore is that they have conviction integrity units working with innocence organization and defenders. We've dramatically increased the number of innocent people exonerated, serving long prison terms. So this has been a really, really important development. And I'm just really afraid that the political heat that you're identifying is going to stand in the way. And Mark, I'm sure you know about the incredible work that the innocence organizations in Michigan have done. It's really impressive. At the Cooley Law School and the University of Michigan Law School, really fantastic, outstanding work. So
Yeah, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for triggering that wave, because the critical difference that the Innocence Projects have made is seen in the fact that for so long those who opposed the death penalty had to appeal to conscience, to reason, to studies, and to a number of other things. And for the average person, that really didn't mean very much.
Right.
But when the scientific evidence started coming forward to show that there was the risk of actually executing innocent people, it made a phenomenal difference in the way that people perceived, the whole question of the death penalty. It shook people up because they realized, what have we done? What might we do? And I think that, as tragic as this execution has been, if anything, if we look at it dialectically, it will yet again highlight for people the tragedy and the crime of this, and cause hopefully people to be shaken and to think about how this could happen again and again and again. And the measure of the ways in which people are moving in a positive and progressive direction is reflected very much in the fact that we have this growing number of progressive prosecutors. It really represents a huge measure of growth, because that's with respect to prosecutors. In between college and law school, I worked for a year as a newspaper reporter in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was talking with a court one of the court officers, and he just made a passing comment about the public defender in Nashville at the time, saying he really despised that guy. He couldn't stand him. And I asked him, I said, well, do you think that people charged with crime shouldn't have lawyers? And he said, oh, they should have lawyers, but not like him. He really tries to defend these people.
Tries to win. No.
That's the public perception of a public defender. So, you know, a prosecutor, if we've moved to the point where as a society we're willing to look at the possibility of having progressive prosecutors, it represents growth and some measure of hope. You know, as depressed as all of us are about the execution.
Yeah, and let's not forget Glenn Funk, who a former defense lawyer, member of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, an organization that I'm very proud of. He is the district attorney now in Nashville, and he has a fantastic conviction integrity unit that does wonderful work.
Well, you know, before you go, I wanted Reverend
Yes.
Dr. Wilson. Well, these people are paying tribute to you because you've taken people who would be cast aside, and you're giving them an opportunity, and you're making the system look at the possibility of their innocence. So many of our people are railroaded. Reverend Dr. Wilson, I've got about 2 minutes for you.
Oh, I'm so happy to see Barry Shack. And I remember got really involved with Innocence Project when Johnny Savory came to push. And Jonathan made his case and another case just a powerful point for us to focus. And we went up to Northwestern and became a part of the Innocence Project. I would hope that before the end of this year, really before the election, we can put a real spotlight on innocence and the danger that occurs when we go as far as the death penalty, because there's no way to turn the clock back. You can't come back from that. I was very troubled by the execution yesterday because the faith community did not rise up as we should have to object to that heinous crime. It is a crime before God, whatever God, however you refer to your eternal being. And so, Barry, we really salute you for the work you have continued to do. And I would hope that we could do maybe Santita, a big Zoom call around innocence, because here are people who spent years, 40, 30, 50 years behind prison bars to only come out and have to struggle to get their voting rights restored and citizenship, full citizenship restored to them. And so I think this is a critical reason why we have to vote in this election. So I would hope we could do something like that, like a town hall on innocence.
Well, I will work on it, but I have to tip, before I give the final word to Attorney Barry Shack, I have to tip my hat to Jamie Calvin from the
Yes.
Yes.
Well, Jamie Calvin connected us today. He said, you know what? I have someone for you. And he said it was Attorney Barry Shack. I said, huh? Really? Okay. Well, he said, no, because you should have someone who really has the historical sweep and the integrity, because everybody on your dream team took hits. And we saw F. Lee Bailey, one of the greatest trial lawyers in the history of jurisprudence, not just American, but that we saw people take hits fighting for innocence. This was not, for us, it was never about one person. It was about a principle. And we've seen you do that through the years, stand up on principles. Jamie stands for people who've been made invisible. And you have been standing up for people who have been deemed guilty, even though they're supposed to be presumed innocent. I mean, and people have been corrupting the evidence and all of that. It's hard to believe, but you shine a light on these people. But I'm wondering about so many others who don't have the cover.
Let me just close with this, because you're all being very kind in attributing to me some agency here, but I'm just one person in what is really an extraordinary movement. And you mentioned, our friends at Northwestern, right, who were, great stalwarts and heroes at the very beginning of this, and remain so today. There's an exoneration initiative at the University of Chicago Law School. And, all across the country, we've made enormous strides. And I'm glad that Mark, pointed that out. I mean, I guess you called it a certain maturity in this movement. I think it's true. And, it's gotten to the point even where people run to become district attorney and they have to have a conviction integrity unit and they have to be self-critical about what they do wrong. And those people are getting elected. I think they'll continue to get elected. And what we're finding now is that there's a backlash. And we have to come to the aid of those who are under attack. And I'll tell you, Alvin Bragg, I was on his transition and it came to conviction integrity. And, he barely got out of the gate before the New York Post was targeting him big time. And so if we don't get out the vote, God
That's
knows
right.
what'll happen to poor Alvin. Excuse me.
No, that's okay. Well,
And quite a
want
number of people. But this is a big movement, right? And we're just sort of here at the Innocence Project in New York, kind of a headquarters to a much larger movement. 71 other organizations in the United States, 13 abroad. There are so many great people, working on these kinds of cases, and it's extraordinary. You should come sometime to one of our annual Innocence gatherings. I mean, we just finished one in New Orleans this year. The next one will be in Seattle in March, and it's just unbelievable to see literally thousands of people, either freed or exonerated, and their families and all the people that work in the organizations to try to get them out and deal with all kinds of issues with respect to reentry and just policy matters to change the whole system. And of course, let me end by saying I second what you said about Jamie Calvin and the Invisible Institute. I think what they've done with their public-facing database has inspired me and other people to go out and try to build these public-facing databases and do all the incredible work that Jamie and his colleagues have done, looking at police misconduct, how to track it, how to understand it, how to do something about it. He's one of the great investigative journalists and one of the smartest people I know. So, Jamie called, and how could I say no? Finding out about
I'm
this
so
program, I'm really honored and really a pleasure to meet you, Reverend Wilson, and certainly Mark. Great to see you, and thanks so much.
Well,
I'm so excited. I read about you.
I mean, this is so exciting. Look,
is.
he's made my stock rise in the Jackson family.
Every
Member of my family, my mother, my father, my brothers, and my sister have all called, and they said, "You have who? What?" So I've got to send this over to them so they can see it. But look over your shoulder, everybody. You see Dr. King in the upper right-hand corner.
Yeah.
That should inspire you. As soon as Dr. King's public life began, he was under audit, federal audit by the IRS. And then he was under investigation and harassment by the FBI. And it is a Barry Scheck, and Alec Lowenstein, 60, 70 years ago, who stood 10 toes down with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And so we want to thank you for all that you've done, because it is your work that has helped us to look at DNA. It is your work. I mean, really, because you did take on a case that was very unpopular in a lot of quarters. But on principle, you said, no, this is not personal. This is principle. And we have to stay on that. And I want to thank you for that, because you really helped to elevate all of us, and you've helped to change the culture for the better. May God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I salute the divinity in you, and I see it shining all the time. May God bless you.
Thank you.
Everybody, let's talk about identity in the next hour. What do you think of Kamala Harris? Is she Black, Indian, Or does it matter? Should it matter? Back in just a few minutes on the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show.